Cosmic here, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about the Bleach starter deck and how you can upgrade it if you went to 2 SPR events, as well as some upgrades for the main set you can look forward to. Now, a small disclaimer here that I'll elaborate more on the end. This is going to look slightly different than what I may normally recommend because I'm planning this as how you would upgrade the deck from both a overall playstyle consistency to kind of a more advanced deck list that's been winning some tournaments at the very end. So think of this one more as a getting more comfortable with the deck and kind of upgrading it towards this path of what the final version is going to look like. That said, I think it is still very fun to play and gives you a good idea of what you can expect in the main set, but this is definitely more of a stepping stone, where in the Hunter x Hunter video that we covered, it was really here's a split between what you do for the SPRs versus, nope, it's completely different for the main set. So with that out of the way, let's get right into it and do this in the same format that we talked about in the previous one. So something that you're always going to include. Now, if you watch the Hunter x Hunter video, you'll know that I get to say always include in this case instead of just sometimes, is that yes, you have 2 of the SPR decks put together now, which means you're always going to have 4 final triggers, you're always going to have 4 special triggers, and then in the case of Bleach with the main set, at least for purple, you will always have 4 color triggers. Now, this is something that's not always going to be true depending on the IP you play or the color that you get, but generally speaking, the way the sets are balanced, 9 times out of 10 there is going to be a color trigger that you're going to want to play. So shout out to the other announcements that I both tweeted about and shared on Facebook today, is we got the LGS weekly winner promos kind of revealed and the other support that's going to be going with it. I'll cover that more in another video, but if you're wondering why this Bakuya says winner, that's why, but something you can look forward to in the main set that is going to be a nice upgrade for the deck. Now, the other thing I want to stress, and this is just more of a good old deck building principle overall, is Ichigo's room and also the Whale Island that I talked about in the Hunter x Hunter video. By and large, the stages are not good in the first year of Union Arena. There are some very niche cases where you might add 1 or a 2 of just because of the late game off chance value that you can provide. But if you are especially a new player who is learning from these videos or looking to start in Union Arena, as a honest, just good rule of thumb, do not include the stages, at least for Bleach and Hunter x Hunter. And I know I'm going to get some flack from this, but I also don't like Shrine in the JJK list. I know some people run it as a one of, but just as a beginner-friendly tip, unless there's going to be some exception that I cover in a video, you will never see me include the stages because, long story short, they just either do not provide enough value by themselves or they're far too conditional. And in the case of Ichigo's room, I would rather just take the action point and draw a card instead of feeling bad about seeing multiple of these in my deck, and would rather have the deck building flexibility. So kind of a little side note I wanted to add on here to just maybe ignore the stages as your first round of deck building. But, you know, I might be a little bit biased. I've been a little bit more in the weeds with some of these deck building considerations, but just something to know as a good rule of thumb. Now, I am going to go in the same fashion that I did with the Hunter x Hunter video and just talk about this as a overall building up the deck strategy and then kind of leading into those 2 deck lists that I talked about at the end. Now, the one disclaimer that I'll add here, and I talked about it in the Hunter x Hunter video, but the Orihime and Ishida kind of loop, as I like to call it, is a very common thing that you're going to see in a lot of Union Arena decks in the future. Now, typically, one other thing that I probably should have elaborated on, and I know I covered in the deck building video, but I realize not everyone might have seen that, so I'll add it here as well. As a general rule of thumb, right, you have 4 spots in your energy line. If you are going up to cards that require 5 or 6 or 7, obviously that is going to increase the number of double energy providers that you need to be running. And in some cases, you will not have a raid fodder, which then means it gets the double value of having both a raid target and providing double energy. So having stuff like the Orihime, which is going to give you the double energy as well as getting to bounce something for value, right? Getting to replay the Ishida in case your hand gets stuck while still promoting your energy, right? This basically becomes a free draw cycle instead, where normally you're spending an AP to get that effect. You are now able to advance an energy, and while you are card neutral at that point, spoiler, you're playing Bleach, you want to discard cards in purple and just digging as much as possible. So these 2 cards make a great combo that you're going to see time and time again, and while it doesn't quite make the cut for main set Bleach, I think it's still something that in this very limited, 3 weeks format that we have left, it is something to just play and get familiar with in how the sequencing matters, because as you might look towards other IPs and other colors, it becomes a absolutely foundational play, especially like in all green decks where they have the cycle as well. So you will see it in the Kurapika list, where, for example, in the Gon and Friends list that tops out at 5 and mostly is 4 or less, is not as heavily required. Moving on from there, we have Chad, which of course is the double energy provider. Sometimes you just really need to get to that 5 energy mark, and it can be great for freeing up a slot while still allowing you to get that energy for the turn, so that on the following turn you can then go into your Ichigo into a raid because you freed up that slot otherwise. So again, something that we're always going to be playing our zeros, we're always going to be playing our low cost raid fodder, and it has the get trigger, so you're always going to see them coming out of life. Again, I want to stress in this video, that's the one thing I really love about Union Arena, because you have a very generous mulligan as long as you are following deck building principles, as well as having a top end that is always accessible and always is going to happen because of either the get or raid triggers. It does allow every single deck to get to do that cool thing that you're trying to build up to, where other games don't always get to execute on that as nicely. So I'm a huge fan of the mulligan rule, as well as like the end game and how it plays out, that you still get to do the cool flavor things. Moving on from there, we kind of have more of our early to mid game now going into our other buildup. And this is where it gets a little bit harder. Like, there are some better main set options that we'll have. But as I was building through this list in particular and thinking about the list I'm going to show at the end, it was a little bit difficult. So the when active double energy generators, this is just a staple. It's always going to be better than, say, Whale Island or the other stages that produce double energies, because you have the option to promote it and attack. And that is a huge factor I really want to stress. That's something you might not really pick up on until you start playing a little bit more and really start to get in the reps. So definitely keep that in consideration. And just when you're thinking about streamlining your turns, it's very easy to take that one turn off and then line up for double energy, because it only costs 2 itself, and it's very easy to play this on turn 2 if you're going second. So then on turn 3, you have that big energy increase. So Orihime, this is one that is going to be very meta dependent, but double block by nature is a very good effect. And because Bleach has so many different ways to reduce your opponent's front line by either 1,000 or kill something or give -1,000 to everyone, this actually becomes a little bit better of a card than we might expect, or at least compared to some of the other IPs that don't have as much BP manipulation in that way. That said, this is really going to be a 4-up because I want people to start testing with it, get used to playing it, because of some changes that I think will be coming in the main set for Bleach. The 3-1 Renji, I understand why he doesn't, but I really wish this did say 500 to this character instead of other character, because that matters just so much. So like, if you get 2 of these on board and then you could, double up on their effects because it's a per card in Union Arena, sure, but then that's waiting on a very niche scenario to hopefully get a 1k bump, where you could instead just use an effect off one of your many other characters or plays that will, get rid of this. And it being 3,500 doesn't really matter, because, tying always goes to attackers, and the 2 breakpoints you actually care about are 3k and 4k. And now, yes, that means on defense, you get to block against a 3k, but the Hunter deck can get to 4k very, very easily. So only in the, limited format Bleach Mirror Match is that 500 really going to matter. But I'll just tell you from experience, by and large, these 3,500 cards they have really don't matter unless they have some other benefit or effect that they get from blocking, or if you need to play them for like the special card, whatever, what have you, right? And then the last one is the Ichigo. This is our raid fodder. You're always going to be playing it. This is always a 4-of in every single Bleach deck until the end of time. Do not remove it. It's one of the best cards. It's the best attacker. It's the early double energy enabler. It sits in your back line. It's raid fodder. This card is goated. Do not ever cut it from your list. That's all I'm going to say about that one. And then, of course, how are we actually closing out the game, right? So the Ichigo, yes, it does give us the impact. Yes, it draws a card. Yes, it has 4K. At least in a starter deck format, it gets there. It's fine. But the main set Ichigo is just so much better. And then, of course, we have, like, what else do we really have? And that's where it gets a little bit questionable. Now, we've talked about Renji. It's removal. You just always want more removal. And because our top end is otherwise pretty light, yep, you're just going to jam the Renjis. Yes, it does cost the 2 action points, but we do have the full suite of final triggers, which means we are more readily available to both play the Renji, play the final trigger to reset our action points, and then still get to do something else, where at least in the limited SPR format, it can feel a bit more, restrictive of what you can really do about extending your plays. And then the Rukia, being the last one, is just a draw filter. It's nice that it has the get. It's nice that it's a 4K for attacking, which again is the important number, but ultimately it is something that you're going to just be doing for the draw effect, and not that exciting per se towards the, the actual main set release, because it gets replaced very, very quickly. Actually, all three of these do, but you are still going to need something that enables the end game and gets you kind of closer to that feeling of what Bleach wants to be doing, which is drawing through a lot of your deck, putting cards in your graveyard or sideline, and then putting them to the outside area by removing them or exiling them for some type of effect. So you still at least get the flavor of Bleach, like this, again, this Ichigo, or they call it removal area, right? Sideline into removal area instead of outside area. Graveyard to exile. If you played trading card games, you know it's one of those combinations of words, but sideline into removal for some type of effect. That is going to be just even more echoed within the main set. So that is the overall list. The other thing I didn't talk about was Tasty Bread. I just threw a 2 of in there so you can get your 3Ks to 4Ks. It's kind of whatever, but again, this is meant to be more of a shell that I would recommend in terms of how we're talking about maybe upgrading your experience as you're playing the Bleach, Purple Bleach specifically archetype, and kind of where things will go. Again, something like the Orihime with the double block is largely going to depend on your local meta. If they're trying to play a bunch of low-to-the-ground rush decks, which we will definitely see in Code Geass set, this double block can be pretty strong, but it largely does depend on what those different breakpoints are that they're going to have, as well as is it going to be like a energy 1 rush? Is it going to be energy 2 where they only have the 2500? That sort of thing, where the double block can definitely buy you a couple turns and be a huge thing. Also, not to be missed, if you hit an active trigger and this becomes a 6K double block, you feel like you just won the lottery, right? It just is incredible. So that is one of the other things to think about, where sometimes it's right to take that first point of damage to see if it's an active trigger, because then you don't lose a unit with Orihime being able to double block. That's a bit more in the weeds of gameplay stuff. I won't talk about too much in this video, but just something to consider. So where does that bring us to 2 very different lists that, well, aren't that different, right? So in the Hunter x Hunter video, I talked about how the starter deck actually had 2 very different archetypes and how the main set will support each of them, which was really cool. However, Purple Bleach doesn't really get that luxury. So the list on top here is something that is a list that I had from forever ago. This is the same deck that I posted in the Facebook group that is a print and play ready proxy. So if you haven't already, join the Facebook group so you can see the Google Drive for that. And it is just what you would expect to be one of the best versions of Purple Bleach, commonly referred to as the triple raid, because you do have, spoiler, 3 different raid targets, where most decks will focus around 2 and be much more beginner friendly in that regard. But because Purple Bleach just has so much absurd draw in it, as well as the other cards that help just filter that you will have access to, like the Rukia in the main set, you're always going to see the right parts of it. Now, here's where I do need to add my one disclaimer. If you watched my previous video on the NA bans or changes that are coming, we know that specific cards are going to be cut, a common and a rare, from the main set, or at least the card count was reduced. Now, if we look at this from an overall meta standpoint and what this would mean, there is no doubt in my mind that if Bandai is doing this from a strictly format health standpoint, then the Orihime needs to get hit. Because that is a 2 cost, it is one of the interesting parts of where does this then fit in the Bleach kind of as you're building up your game plan. And so that's where we ended up adding some of the extra energy draws in this case, or in the version down here, I ended up adding the double blocker, right? In the top list, which again has the 5 cost energy raid targets, you really do need to have that double energy established. So I think going up to 4 here absolutely makes sense. This is the when active double purple energy, where down here, I try to make this a little bit more beginner friendly in this bottom list, where it's more about, hey, I've upgraded my starter decks, but I'm still not totally comfortable with like raid and how to, set up my turns for the raid fodder, or maybe if I get an active trigger. So this list at the bottom, which also has a 2 of impact negate, which I think could be very relevant, right? At least early on, to make sure you don't just auto die to the Kurapika or maybe your opponent's Ichigo as well. That's going to have impact, right? So the impact or the shrink one. So this one can be really good in a lot of cases, where the Byakuya, it has the impact himself. Sorry. So Ichigo is removal. Byakuya is the impact, and then Rukia is just draw and filtering. Is kind of what the 3 different raid pieces do. So overall, this is kind of where I would recommend, at least again for newer players. Hopefully the starter deck list for the SPR is like a good foundation. This list here at the bottom is more, okay, I'm a little bit more comfortable with it. I want to get a couple more cards upgraded from the main deck. You know, what does that look like? It's kind of a middle stepping stone. And then for what a lot of people will say at the end, like, I don't have a personal preference. I just have played the 3 raid version of Bleach the most. So in my opinion, I'm more comfortable with it. And I think it's going to be better in that regard. You know, I'll let everybody decide in the comments, but I think what your end goal should be, once you're very comfortable with Union Arena, once you understand energy line management and promoting when to promote and action point and all that good stuff, like really got your foundation down for Union Arena, then that's when I would recommend going into this top list. So think of this as, again, more of like a beginner to intermediate to more expert tournament winning list is kind of how I want to approach this one. A little bit different than the Hunter x Hunter video, where again, it was just 2 completely different archetypes that needed to be split out. So it made more sense. So with that, yes, there is a sub theme, and this is more of a teaser for volume 2, where there is another sub archetype that is available in Purple Bleach, but it is very underdeveloped and just not that exciting because it doesn't have enough cards, but it does become a tier 1 staple in volume 2 immediately. So yes, Purple Bleach, even with the hit, I'm going to say is going to be a very strong tier 1 deck at launch. It is insane. So that is the other thing I'll say at the end, that yes, if you might have had a bad experience with the SPRs, just wait 1 month longer because the full set is insane for what you get to do with Bleach. So with that, we are a day away now from the last couple of SPR events that are going to be happening. I have 2 more events myself that I'm very much looking forward to, and the tournament promos look really sweet. So I will be in Dallas, going to be excited for the One Punch Man promos and all that, but definitely let me know your thoughts. Are you, again, a Bleach fan or more Hunter x Hunter? Are you excited for the LGS promos? Have you talked to your LGS about the promos? If you haven't already, make sure they sign up before it's too late because they are sick. And otherwise, just remember to have fun with Union Arena. Again, based on how it's designed and because all the different IPs and colors get the opportunity to have the final triggers and the special triggers and all that stuff, it is really a game that is meant to be fun and celebrate the IPs themselves. So get out there, have fun, get battling, and hopefully I'll get to see you in a future Union Arena bigger event whenever regionals and all that happen. So until then, my friends, stay safe, stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.